guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a sort of a knife video. Specifically, I want to talk about the knife community and some of the stuff that's been going on. There's been quite a lot of drama, if you will, lately. And in fact, some people who I talk to regularly have suggested maybe the knife community is just too toxic, and in order to maintain my mental and emotional well-being, I'm just going to have to kind of drop this hobby. And I'll speak to that more specifically at the end, but I don't quite think that is the case. However, there are some things that I want to say. Now, let me warn you, if you're watching this is going to be a little bit preachy because I'm a preacher. And in that role as a minister, I deal with a lot of conflict, right? People come to me and often, their motives may not be ideal. Everyone who's in a disagreement with someone wants to be able to say, well, the minister agrees with me, so you must be an idiot. And so I do get people coming just looking for, someone to pat them on the back and tell them they're right. Rarely does that ever happen. However, I want to start out with a story that I think will be a little bit revealing and helpful in terms of this whole discussion. So a couple of years ago now, I guess maybe more like 3 or 4 years ago now, I was working, providing first aid coverage at an event, and they had one of those towers there. I'm sure you've seen it, where you climb up the tower and you jump off the tower onto this giant airbag. And there are certain ways they want you to fall, and they instruct you before, but this one little girl jumps off, and it looked like she did okay, perhaps over rotated a little bit. But when she kind of landed, she couldn't move, or at least it may have been psychosymptomatic, but she couldn't move. She said she didn't have any pain, but she just couldn't move. And so, of course, this could be a really serious thing. By the way, it turned out to not be a huge problem for those of you who are freaking out right away. It turned out she was okay once we got her in an ambulance and they transported her. But in the meantime, we quickly deflate the airbag and we get up there and begin providing first aid, stabilizing her spine, checking her vitals, getting, someone had C-spine right away. And so we're there trying to help this little girl. She was conscious. She was looking at us. She could talk, but she was, very, it was hard to get straight answers out of her. Anyway, we're focusing on this patient, and all around us, these people gathered in to the point that they were like nudging us out of the way to try and get a look at this girl and what had happened to her. And so, needless to say, we pretty promptly, as soon as the bag sort of deflated and we were down on the level at people's sort of crotch level, like the worst place you can be because we're all kneeling down on our hands and knees. We're like, this is not going to work. And we ended up having to get a number of firefighters to come in and move the crowd back. And in fact, the crowd was so ignorant that, we had to actually use physical force to get them away and say, get lost. Here's this little girl, terrified. Like, you can see the look in her face, and you can see the panic setting in as this crowd just kind of looms over her. And the more the crowd pushed in, the bigger you could see the fear response in her eyes. And so we're like, come on guys, really, like, get lost. So we fairly forcefully and determinedly had to push these people away. But the reason I tell that story is because people just love when bad stuff happens. They love drama. They love to see, we're all rubbernecking at a car accident, and it's it's just a natural inclination for human beings, okay? So let me, now that I've gotten that out of the way, point out that, look, when something happens that is, when some kind of conflict takes place and two people are in a disagreement, you're going to get a bunch of attention, especially it doesn't matter what community you're in, right? I don't mean to say especially in the knife community, but especially in a community that's sort of a small world, right? Where everyone kind of knows what's going on, you're going to get attention. It's going to be that way. And so that's the first thing that I want to put out there, is when something bad happens, understand that it's gonna, get sort of a firestorm happening in a small community. It doesn't have to be the knife community, it can be any community. All right. So now the question becomes, how are we going to handle it when bad stuff happens? Because guess what? Despite the fact, we all want only good stuff to happen, right? I don't think anyone watching this is like, nah, I hope my house burned down. I hope I get in an accident. I hope I get severe. We don't want bad stuff to happen. We want only good stuff. But the fact is, in this life, reality is bad stuff happens. It happens all the time. We've got to learn to deal with it. All right, so that's where we have to say, what are we going to do? How are you going to deal with that bad stuff when it does happen? And oftentimes, the knife community has done a great job. There are tons of stories out there of people helping each other, supporting each other, encouraging one another, and that's fantastic. And so I want to share some positive things that we ought to kind of consider rules for ourselves. And look, I said, this is going to get a little preachy. I'm a preacher. But first of all, the first thing you've got to do when something bad happens, when you're in a disagreement with someone, you've got to step up and deal with problems in person first. Okay? I can't tell you how many times people come into my office and they say, Kevin, let me tell you about so-and-so and what a miserable, no good, rotten jerk that he or she is. And here's the 100 things that they did that wronged me and that were just so awful. And my question to those people is always the same. What did so-and-so say when you asked them about this? Right? And often that brings people up short because guess what? They have come to me first. They haven't even addressed this issue with the primary party, and that nothing good is going to come from that. Okay, the very first thing that you've got to do when there's an issue is address it with the individual or individuals involved. So if you've got a disagreement with someone, let them know. And I mean, it's not, and I don't mean like minor stuff, right? I've given various YouTubers a hard time in the past because they like a knife feature that I don't like, or they like a knife size. You guys all know I like bigger stuff. So, I did that video where I kind of poked fun at the whatever that little Wee knife was that Ben that used to be at Blade HQ made, and I just said the knife is too small to be of any use. That's a little bit different because it's sort of poking fun and it's a public discussion. But when it's a real personal issue that you have about something, someone said something about you, someone has done something that you found offensive or problematic, you need to go to that person and address it with them first. Okay, now, is it possible that the two of you together won't be able to work it out? Absolutely possible. And then you've got some choices. If it's something that needs resolution, if it's something you can just agree to disagree, then fine. After you've had your conversation, you go, look, we clearly disagree about this. We're going to have to part ways in disagreement. That's fine. If it's something that sort of has to be resolved to move forward, that's when you can go ahead and get help. So oftentimes, this happens to me in my line of work all the time. Two people have some kind of problem, or they want a solution to something, or they're wondering how to move forward, and they disagree on what the best course of action is. And so they'll have me sort of step in as a third party. And I purposely want to point out something here, not an objective third party, only objective in the sense that you're not as emotionally invested in the situation. However, people know, I'm a preacher. I have a pretty strict moral code. And so, sometimes the answer to a question is, yeah, you're wrong about this and you're right about this. Not always, but sometimes that happens. I would remind you that, and whether or not you're a religious person doesn't matter. The point still stands. On one occasion in Matthew chapter 22, beginning in verse 23, Jesus is approached by the Sadducees in regards to a disagreement that they'd had with the Pharisees, another leading religious group. And essentially, Jesus goes, actually, Sadducees, you guys are wrong. The Pharisees are right about this. Okay, it happens. Okay, so sometimes there is a wrong party and a right party, and it's not wrong to say that, right? Sometimes there is a difference between right and wrong, and we need to acknowledge it. So that's, and I want to make that very, very clear. Sometimes the perception comes across in a disagreement as if, there's no such thing as a right answer, and nobody can ever be accurate or right about anything. And I don't buy into that at all. And if, especially in the YouTube world, you guys know I like hollow grinds. And if you say, Kevin, you're wrong about hollow grinds, here's why they suck, and you can formulate an argument that proves your point, great. That's fantastic. Those are the kind of discussions we can and should be having. All right. Now, when we do that, though, we need to share the facts, right? What actually happened? What's really involved? What statistics, maybe, or measurements, or whatever the case may be? What are the pertinent facts to this discussion? Okay. So, perfect example right now, Slicey Dicey blew it. And he said as much. So, in discussing that, the fact is that, yeah, Slicey messed up on a number of occasions. And by the way, I know Brian, I talk to him pretty regularly, and he's gone on record, and there's a couple of videos out there where he says, yeah, I was dumb, right? Now look, I know that you may be angry, and in many cases that anger is probably justified. All right. That doesn't mean it's the best approach. Okay. Recently, I was driving to a place where we always hike, and there's an unassumed road that goes back there, and I'm driving down the unassumed road, and this guy and his kids and his dog were walking down the road. Now, not everyone walk. It's not a good trail. Okay, you need to have a 4x4 to go down there. I do have a 4x4, so I was driving down there because I just wanted to get most of the way. I wanted to get sort of to the trailhead by driving, and then I would let the dog out, go for a quick run, and get back in the truck. I didn't have a lot of time this particular day. Anyway, this guy got so mad at me for driving on this unassumed road because he just hadn't seen anyone drive on it before, and he was walking. And he started yelling at me. And of course, it was one of those days, and I started yelling back. And you're right. You could argue that it was totally justified, that both of us were fine in what we did. But I don't like doing that. I don't like being that way. And so even though I would argue that, okay, I wasn't in the wrong doing what I was doing, I was in the wrong responding the way that I responded. So I parked my car. I chased after him down the trail. He probably thought I was coming to fight him, but I said, hey, look, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for the way that I acted. I'm having one of those days, and so I would suggest that even when you get in a disagreement with someone, even when you're angry, and I'll admit I was angry because this guy was being a jerk and trying to set rules that he just made up out of his head and apply them to everyone. It's still better to keep a calm head and deal with these situations with some civility. All right. Even when you're angry. The next thing, and this is sort of related to this, but it's a different approach that's really, really tempting on social media. Don't play politics. All right. I have seen this so many times. In fact, this seems to be the most common way of dealing with conflict in any kind of a public venue. So I've seen it with, kids in school, whether university or public school. I've seen it in workplaces. I've seen it in offices. I've seen it in other organizations. I've seen it in churches. Two people have a disagreement, and what the two people do is, instead of going and talking to one another, they run around within the organization and try to kind of gain a following for their side. So, it's like you and I have a problem, and instead of trying to hash out the problem with you, I run off and I find all my friends, and you run off and you find all your friends, and it becomes like a popularity contest. Whoever gets the most votes is right. Well, guess what? Democracy, right and wrong is not a democratic process. Right and wrong exists regardless of what anybody thinks or says about it. And so what you need to be doing is figuring out what's the best way to deal with this, not how many people can I get to agree with me versus how many people that other idiot can get to agree with him. And social media is a really, really tempting area for this to happen. When you've got a bunch of followers on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or wherever else, obviously we're mostly talking about YouTube here, it's so tempting to say to all your followers, this is what happened, this is why this guy's so wrong, everyone come on, join me, and we'll get him. Well, look, if you're right, you're right. It doesn't matter how many votes you have. Okay. Now, is there a point at which you will share with the community? Yeah, sure. If someone has, if you've talked about it in person, if you've brought in a third party and you still can't resolve this issue, then it doesn't hurt to say, hey, I'm going to share publicly what happened to me, how I was wronged or why I think I'm right, and let the collective in on the situation. But that's sort of a last resort. All right. And along the lines of this, check your ego. Okay. Often, what happens in a conflict, and by the way, I'm not saying that this is the case in every one of these conflicts that have taken place in the knife world, but when we disagree with someone, the very first thing that happens is, our pride and our ego get involved, and we go, "I'm right, and I'm going to prove I'm right, and everyone else is a jerk and idiot and whatever else." Look, a good person is interested in doing what's right, not in being right. Okay. And so when it comes to a situation where there's some kind of agreement, disagreement, some kind of a problem, if we're going to handle it well, we're going to handle it by figuring out what the right thing to do is and doing it, not trying to bolster our case and ignore everybody else's. I want to touch a little bit on Brian. I've known Brian for quite a while. I talk to him fairly regularly, and look, he knows he blew it. His channel is probably done. If he still wants to have a platform, it would be very, very difficult for him to do that. The level of transparency needed to establish that trust would be hard to maintain and still have any kind of personal life. And frankly, on YouTube, there's only a certain amount you want to share. And some YouTubers, some knife YouTubers, they don't even share their name or their face, right? They just are. It's all about the knives, and that may be a choice you want to make. But that choice is kind of gone for Brian. And so he's going to have a really, really tough go ahead. What I hope out of that particular situation is that anyone who has been wronged in any way is made right. And I'm pretty, having talked with Brian, I know that that's what he wants as well. He does feel bad. He does want to make it right. And I hope that that's possible. There have been suggestions that maybe it's not, and that will be really, really sad if it's not. But I hope that, he got in over his head and he made some really dumb moves, and that he will make it right. I do wish him the best. I wish him well. I don't have any ill will toward the guy, not at all. In fact, as I said, I wish him all the best. I hope that this works out in some way that's positive for him, and he can move forward better and healthier. So that's all I'm going to say about that particular situation. I do want to come back to my initial question: is the knife community toxic? Is the knife community toxic? No more than any community. The fact is, people are people. They don't get better and they don't get worse based on what hobby they are into. All right. There are a lot of great people in the world. There are a lot of people with problems in the world. There are a lot of good people with problems in the world. Okay. And there are also a lot of scoundrels. Okay, those people exist as well. Maybe it's 1 in 100, but you got to think, how many thousands of people. Just bear with me for a second here. If 1 in 100 people is a miserable jerk, okay, think about how many people are in the knife community, right? Where there are thousands of people. That means we've got quite a few miserable jerks, right? So I want to throw that out there. The best way to make a community better is to be better yourself. And that's what all of us can work on. And one of the ways we can work on that is thinking carefully about how we handle conflict and doing it in a way that can be as effective as possible. All right. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope this is helpful to some of you. I'd love to hear your comments down below. Let me finish by saying I threw in some knives here that I feel remiss in not giving enough screen time lately. It's summer, so I've got these shorts that came from Mark's Work Wearhouse, and they're kind of lightweight shorts, and this does not work well in those lightweight shorts. So I just haven't been carrying it as often. So I'm kind of looking forward actually to some cooler weather coming along where I can carry this a little more frequently, because I do love the Cold Steel Formax. This guy, the Real Steel Row Cut, designed by Ivan Bragnitz, and this is the Knife Nuts exclusive version. Again, this is a knife I love, and I just haven't had a time to really spend with it. I'm working on a review. I'm trying to carry it a little more often in preparation for that. And finally, another Real Steel. This is the Real Steel H6. This is one of those great budget knives, 14C28N steel, and I find myself carrying this an awful lot. I've done a review of the H6 before, but it wasn't this particular version. So I want to sort of readdress this and come back with a full video talking about this particular version of the Real Steel H6. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. We'll talk to you soon.